Hey everyone. Oh my god. Okay. Hey, welcome to your last reading lesson. It is reading 3, so unit 2, reading 3. It's called alternative education. So remember, like I said on the virtual classroom session this morning, this is the last reading you need to know for your final exam. You do not need to know reading 4. Okay, so it is called alternative education, but in order to understand alternative education, we need to understand the meaning of the word alternative. The stress is here, alternative. Alternative is an adjective, and it's actually used in collocation with lots of different words. So we have, for example, alternative energy, alternative music, or to make an alternative choice. So we often see alternative with these nouns like energy, music, and choice. Okay. So what does alternative mean? So first, let's talk about alternative energy. So I want you to think about, in your country, where do people usually get the energy for their homes? Like, where do you get your electricity from? How does your hot water get heated? So for a lot of people, this can be like, oops, this can be like nuclear energy. Is it nuclear or Is it that? That looks wrong to me. Okay. Nuclear energy. So that's a really common or usual energy source. For some places, it is coal. Here in Canada, you probably pay a company called London Hydro, and hydro actually means water. So moving water like over a dam is where most Canadians get their energy for their houses. Another common source of energy for our another common source of energy for our cars is oil or gas. So these are really usual sources of energy. So when somebody uses a source of energy that is not usual, we call it alternative, meaning a different choice than the usual choice. So these are the usual choices for energy. An alternative choice would be something different than the usual. So right now, I want you to try and think about what are maybe some alternative energy sources. Maybe you are thinking something like solar, which means from the sun. So solar energy, you see on top of houses and buildings sometimes, those grids that suck in the energy from the sun. You also see them in greenhouses to help plants grow. Another alternative energy is wind. If you have traveled in Canada or driven around southwestern Ontario, you will see these big windmills that look like this and they turn. And those are wind turbines, and they are collecting energy from the wind. When I lived in England, I lived in a city called Brighton, and Brighton was right on the water, right on the beach of the English Channel. And there, they use tide, which is when the tide is when water moves in during the day and then moves out during the day. And so the energy from the water moving out and moving in is called tidal. Tide is a noun, tidal is the adjective. So these are alternate sources of energy. They're not super common yet. The alternative to oil is electricity. So more and more we are seeing electric cars, and hopefully in the future everybody will have an electric car. So this is usual sources of energy, and these are alternative sources, meaning a different option or a different choice than the usual. Okay, so what I want you to do now is to think about what this means for music. Like, what do you think are like usual or common genres of music, and what do you think we would call alternative music? So for a usual, like the most usual form of music is probably pop, and the reason it is called pop is come from the word popular, and popular means most people like it. So a lot of you come from Asia, so you probably listen to K-pop, or different pop musicians from there, but we also have pop music. Pop music is what is usually played on the radio. I'm also going to say like rock music is a very common genre of music, and right now like hip hop. So I'm going to say these three genres are our most usual genres of music. So any genres of music that are outside this usual are what we call alternative music, meaning a different choice than what is usual. So you can probably think of many different genres of music, everything from like punk to trap to jazz. Most of these are called alternative forms of music. You can even actually have something called alternative pop or alternative rock. And this means same genre, but done in a different way that doesn't feel usual or normal. Okay. So these are like compound nouns, like alternative energy, alternative music, but we can also use alternative as a adjective, meaning most of my friends are going to Fanshawe, but I made an alternative choice and I am going to do an online course at home. Or I am making an alternative choice and I am going to go to Western. So anything that is, if the usual is Fanshawe, the alternative choice is something different than Fanshawe, like going to Western or doing something online or not going to school at all. Maybe you want to work after you graduate from level 8. So that's an alternative choice. Okay. So the title of this of the reading is alternative education. So this is really interesting because I want you to think in your country, what is the usual form of education, and can you identify any alternative forms of education? So for example, here in Canada, the usual form, that's not a board marker, the usual form of education is public school. So public school is where like most kids go to public school for elementary school and also for high school in Canada. Though some kids also go to Catholic school. That's also a really common form. And then here in Canada, because we have 2 official languages, French and English, some kids go to French school. So those are probably our 3 most usual schools. So what's an alternative to this? And this is interesting for right now because all of us are probably doing alternative forms of schooling for our kids and for us. Like this right now on YouTube is an alternative form of schooling. So if you decide to do online school, that's different than the usual. Also, if you decide to homeschool your children, that's an alternative form of schooling as well, an alternative form of education. There are usually like different kinds of schools that you have the option of sending your children to. There's a school in Canada called Montessori. Montessori schools are actually quite international. They're a private school. You must pay money to have your children go there. But they do an alternative curriculum, meaning they do not follow the government public school curriculum. They do things completely differently and approach schooling in a completely different way. I actually went to a Montessori school before I went to elementary school when I was a child. And I went when I was very young, but we learned pretty high level math. We learned about like classical music composers. So the education was quite different than what you would find in a traditional kindergarten class. Like it's a little more high level. So these are different forms of alternative education. Can you think of any examples of alternative education in your own country? So I would like you on your piece of paper to make this for your own country. So what are your usual forms of education and what are some examples of some alternative forms of education? Okay. So you can pause and do that. And when you return, I'm going to tell you what your homework is. Okay, hopefully you're back. So your last reading homework is reading 3 called Alternative Education. It's on page 69 to 71. And then you need to do the exercises, and that starts on page 72 to 74. This will, of course, be in your calendar under homework, and I will be posting the answers tomorrow. Now, the skill review isn't something we have learned in class together. It's about identifying details. But I want you to see if you can do it based on what you know about writing essays. Like we know how a paragraph is usually structured, right? So the main idea is usually in the first or second sentence, or we have a final sentence, like a concluding sentence. And generally, our details and examples and evidence are found kind of in the middle of a paragraph, usually. So I want you to try to do the skill review based on your knowledge of how to write an essay. Okay, that's it. So that's your reading homework tonight. You will also, following this, have a grammar video to also watch today. Okay, have a good one. Bye.